Hello, bookworms! Today we are joined by artists Lois Van Barl, known to many as Loish, and Filipino illustrator Raxenne Maniquiz. This discussion will revolve around their respective practices working as creatives in the Philippines and the Netherlands. Lois Van Barl is a digital artist who has been drawing her whole life. She does character design work for clients all over the world and spends her free time making digital paintings and sketches. In 2016, she teamed up with publisher 3D Total to release her first art book, The Art of Loish, which was followed by The Sketchbook of Loish in 2018, and recently The Style of Loish in 2022. Lois is currently based in the Netherlands. Raxenne Maniquiz is a graphic designer and illustrator from the Philippines. Her work depicts images of flora and fauna, mostly the kind endemic to her country, drawn with deep, painterly strokes and brilliant contrasts. These finely textured illustrations appear in brand campaigns, product packaging, apparel design, stationery, and published materials. In 2021, she won the prestigious Young Gun Award. Let's welcome the wonderful Lois and Raxine.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Lois, for joining us today. I'm very excited to talk about our respective crafts and tell our audience about everything we do as digital artists. So, without further ado, let's start. How are you doing, and where are you calling us from?
Thanks so much for having me, and it's really great to meet you. I'm a big fan of your work too. It's very beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm in the Netherlands right now. It's around 10 a.m. in the morning, so I've got my morning coffee with me, and
Okay.
yeah, I'm just starting the day.
Okay. So you call yourself a digital artist. For me, I call myself a designer and illustrator. So maybe we can talk about the distinction between those titles and, for those who are not familiar with their jobs.
Yeah, I do have like a hard time trying to figure out like one label that fits with me because
Mm-hmm.
I do
Mm-hmm.
like I've always just kind of done digital art, like made digital drawings because I enjoyed it. And I didn't really have like a greater goal than that at first. And then I ended up studying animation. And then when I
Mm-hmm.
graduated animation, I did more like concept art type of work. So, but I do a lot of like digital painting and sketching, and a lot of what I do now for my income is creating like resources around digital art because a lot of people find it very mysterious process. So
Right.
I always struggle to say, like, when somebody comes up to me and they're like, what do you do? I always say like, well, I make drawings, because I don't really know, like I don't have like one title for my art because, or like what I do, because the use of my art is different in different contexts. I don't know how
Right.
you feel about that with your work.
Yeah, actually, I mean, you do a lot of things, and I guess just saying, I mean, you're an artist or a digital artist kind of encompasses all of those things. I mean, you also do concept art. Uh, do you also animate?
I used to animate more, but I kind of like moved away from that a little
Okay.
bit because I always like drawing the most, but I can
Mm,
animate and I'm familiar with the
yeah,
whole process. So, but I wouldn't call myself an animator now, but it's one of the skills that I have.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay. Do you think there are common misconceptions that people have about digital art or about your line of work?
Yeah, I mean, it depends where you're at. Because if I'm talking to somebody who is like completely not familiar with digital art,
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that like they often believe that digital art is like sort of like automatically generated by the computer. So I've had a lot of conversations at
Oh,
like family events and stuff where they're like, so you just put a filter on something, and I'm like, no, I
oh, okay.
really, yeah, like a lot of people think that because it's digital that you're not actually drawing it yourself. And I do use digital tools a lot in my process, but I really believe in using the digital tools to create art the way you would on paper, essentially, like to just build it up.
Great.
It's still like handwork. It's still something that you're doing like it's a drawing process. So there's a lot of people who don't get that. And then within the digital art community, I think there's the misconception that it's very difficult and very complicated to do. And I actually believe that digital art can be easy and intuitive. So that's something that I really base a lot of my learning content around. Your
Oh,
work is
okay.
also very hand drawn as well, right?
Yeah.
It's got like a
Yeah.
very traditional feel to it.
Yeah. Actually, I've discovered digital art in 2013. Like I didn't know it could be like a career path, honestly, because I graduated with a degree in advertising. So I thought I was gonna be like at ad agencies and everything. And I think having digital art paved this way of like being able to illustrate all these kinds of things without the, I guess, without the pressure of traditional media. And I think because I'm a commercial illustrator and working with a lot of clients, making digital art has been, well, it's not easy, but it's making the process more seamless because like with their visions and everything. So yeah, but people were actually surprised that it's digital. That's what they assume
Yeah.
from my work, because it looks like the old botanical drawings, but just a bit more like saturated. But yeah, when you mentioned about I just remembered like right now there's a lot of debate around um, AI, artificial
Oh, yeah.
intelligence generated art. So I guess I just want to know, what are your thoughts? I mean, being a digital artist and a concept artist as well.
Yeah, I have very complicated thoughts around it because it's so something that's so in flux and still being created. So I'm not sure. I think a lot of the fears that many artists have around it is around the potential that it has.
Mhm.
And we don't know where it's going to go. We can only imagine where it's going to go. Um, Based on how AI is now, like what I find very frustrating is that people can just type living artist styles into it and then get
Right,
like
right.
images generated in somebody's style. And on one hand, I find, style is not something that can be copyrighted. Style is something that anybody can use. So whether an
Yeah,
AI does like sort of mimics a style or whether a person mimics a style, you have the same situation where it's like you just have to accept it. And it's also part of the creative process, very important that everybody can work in any style. But I find it frustrating with the AI that like they can use my art to generate images without
right.
like paying me anything, like without
Yeah,
paying a license fee for the use of the art that goes in it.
yeah,
And I think a lot of people believe that they own the images that come out of the AI. But I feel like if the
right.
AI is using my work to generate something, that some of the ownership is on, like is mine actually. So it's very like challenging in terms of copyright. It's like challenging the boundaries of copyright as we know it, and I find it
Right, right.
very. It's like interesting on one hand and kind of scary on the other. How
Yeah,
do you
that's
feel about
true.
AI?
Honestly, I when it first started showing, I was really like, it's really interesting to be able to do that kind of images, but also like, I don't know, it's been months already, and now I'm kind of seeing how homogenous it looks. Like
Yeah,
you kind of know it's AI art. It's, I don't know, it's
yeah,
kind of generated its own style. I think it's, yeah, it's actually scary, but I feel like um the right people or the right projects or the right clients would really value artists and their craft. And I feel like, if, I don't know, it's really I'm trying to process my thoughts around it.
yeah.
But
There's
yeah,
so much. I get how you feel
yeah,
because like
because
as soon as you start thinking about it, it creates so many
yeah,
scenarios that are like,
yeah,
but what if this and what if that, and
yeah,
it's a lot. It's a lot
yeah.
to
Because like,
process.
yeah, because like on one hand, it says a lot about you, like typing the prompts, because like
Yeah.
there are really interesting things that are coming out, but like, is that, I mean, the in the realm of concept art, like that's your concept, but the craft isn't really yours. So Yeah, it's a vague
Yeah, it
title.
is. And
Yeah.
what I've noticed as well is that the pictures look really good from a distance. So you see the picture and it
Yeah.
like the overall
Yeah.
picture looks very good. But
Yeah.
then when you really go in and try to look
Right.
for like those details that really make a piece, that really
Yeah.
create intent, that's often missing. There's something
Yeah.
kind of vacant about it, but
Yeah.
it is very powerful. Maybe it will evolve to solve those issues as well. Um,
Yeah.
but I really do hope that that people will continue to enjoy artwork and images for the message and like the
Yeah.
like the intent and the story behind it, rather than just whether it's a nice picture, because that
Yeah.
doesn't mean as much as like
Exactly.
how was it created, who created it, why did they create it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that those are the things that make art interesting to me, and that's entirely missing from AI. But it's a potentially very powerful tool to create
Yeah.
iterations, and like I could see myself using it to create variations, for example, to spark
Right. Yeah.
ideas, because you can put an image in there and ask for it to create random variations from it, and I could see that being like inspiring for the process, like thought provoking.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for those insights about AI art. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so the title of your book is The Style of Lois, and it includes exercises and tips in finding one's own art style. So, what was the process for you finding your style? Like, did you already know about it when you started drawing that I wanted it to look like this, or was there a journey?
Yeah, it was very much a journey. When I first started drawing, because I've been drawing my whole life, but when I was a teenager, I reached a point where it became like a very intense, almost obsessive activity that I did, because I suddenly, in a short amount of time, discovered a lot of work that was, cartoony and stylized, but also realistic and mature. And that was something that really affected me on a deep level when I saw it. So I discovered Art Nouveau and Alphonse Mucha's work, these
Mm,
beautiful, elaborate posters. And I also discovered like anime styles, like
mhm.
anime manga on the
Yeah.
internet. So I never got into like specific animes or mangas, but I did like kind of see the style everywhere. And I was really impacted by, because I as a teenager I wanted to consume content that was pretty and cute, like I'd grown up
Mhm.
with Disney, but I also wanted
Yeah.
it to be a little bit edgy and a little bit
Mm,
exciting, and those styles had that, and I became
yeah.
very focused on trying to capture that in my own work, and I started drawing every day just out of a sort of need to cultivate something. And I
Mhm.
very passively absorbed these inspirations. And it was sort of like a cauldron, like a witch cauldron. It's like all these things were thrown in, and I was sort of like stirring it, and then
Yeah.
something came out, and that ended up being my style. And it wasn't really a conscious choice. It was more like intense fascination that ended up growing something out of it. And I think I'm still in many ways still in that process of trying to capture that, what I initially thought was so interesting as a teenager.
Mhm.
So it was like not intentional, but it was very much a process that started when I decided that that's something that I really wanted to do.
Cool. Actually, when you mentioned the Art Nouveau, like seeing your works, I think there's that sort of influence, like just little bits of. I feel like it's with the colors and the some of the fluidity. So I think it's nice that like as we go along or as we grow up, we're it's kind of like subconsciously or unconsciously getting all of these things, and when you look back, oh, okay, now I'm seeing it in my art. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because whenever I do, because I make tutorials for my patrons every month, and
Mm-hmm.
they ask me sort of like what they want to see a tutorial on,
Mm-hmm.
and then they like recently someone was like, "Well, could you do a tutorial on shapes?" And I was like, "I don't know, I've never really thought about shapes," but I made the tutorial, but to do it, I kind of like analyzed my own process. So I would start
Oh.
thinking about how I'm using shapes while I'm drawing and like becoming more aware.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that so much of my shape language is like the Art Nouveau shapes. Like almost every
Oh.
shape I draw has like this blobby flowiness to it. And it's really funny to think about how much I'm still channeling something that had so much impact. It must be the same. How has your style evolved?
Um, Honestly, I think when I first started, I was just really trying to use digital art like in the traditional way. I mean, I'm still doing it right now, but before, I think I was just really tinkering with the brushes, like, like with all of these brushes, like you just get so overwhelmed. So I think I had a phase, and I was accepting different kinds of clients, like and on top of my day job before, I was a freelancer. I was taking all of these jobs like, Rax, can you do a watercolor style? Like, yeah, okay. And I didn't know how to do it, but I just, like, I tried doing the watercolor thing. I think I tried a lot of different things. I did collages, and I think um it just, doing plants or doing flora, maybe it was also unconscious, with that journey, that I'm just really gravitating towards that. So yeah, and now that's how I ended up here. But honestly, another thing is, I'm so bad with anatomy. Like, oh my god, I almost failed anatomy class in college. So I was like, I can't draw people, just let's draw plants. So
Yeah,
that's
but
another thing.
that I think is like a huge factor, because I was talking about this the other day in one of my tutorials, that I was thinking about how somebody's style is a lot about techniques that they think of in order to bypass limitations. Like I think a lot of
Exactly.
artist
Yeah.
styles are basically because, for example, me, I have a very unsteady hand. Like if I have to draw one steady line, I can't do it. My hand is too
Right,
shaky.
right.
And a lot of my style is about having just sketch lines
Yeah.
looser. You know,
Yeah.
I have to keep it loose because
Yeah.
if I want it to be very like straight and perfect,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. It just
Okay.
doesn't. And so I just decided to cut that out of my process and just keep everything very loose. And people are like, "Oh, that's so unique," but it's actually just my way of trying to like
Yeah.
not do something that I hate. You know, and it's the same with
Yeah.
like straight lines and perspective. My work is very character
Right.
based because it's more organic, and I think that
Right.
that's why it's so valuable to experiment and to
Yeah.
try many different things,
Exactly.
because then you end up finding something um, that clicks for you, and then you know that you
Exactly.
found something valuable, right, for your style.
Yeah. Yeah. That's honestly just, we're just trying to adapt.
Yeah.
We're just
Yes,
like,
exactly.
yeah, we're trying to adapt. We're trying to, I guess, survive and just,
Yeah.
whatever
And
works
we
for us.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we can't do everything. I think that's really important for
Exactly.
artists to
Yeah.
accept. Like you can't be good at everything. You can't like be an expert at everything. So you have to just find your the thing that you want to focus on. You have to make a choice, I think, at some point.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
can really help, like, or you can be somebody who likes to try everything, but then that also becomes a choice, right? You have to choose,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then you find your
Yeah.
artistic strength.
So now that we've talked a bit about our respective professions, I want to discuss the communities, and the larger creative economies that we belong to in the Philippines and the Netherlands. So, um, from what I experienced, the creative community here in the Philippines, we're a very tight knit group. So, almost everyone knows everyone, and I really do feel the support coming from different studios, illustrators, artists, and um, most of the time designers would refer fellow designers, would refer fellow artists, and I think there's an openness to it, and I feel like that's the essence of bayanihan. So bayanihan is a Tagalog word. It means working together and helping each other out. Yeah. So is that something um, that also happens in the Netherlands? Like, how is the can you describe the creative economy that you belong to, and do you feel the support?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I do have to say that, like, as somebody who I kind of cultivated my entire career and online presence, on the internet, and
Mhm.
it took, like, I always, I never really, I grew up living in many different countries, going from place to place,
Oh,
and I never really developed like strong roots anywhere until I came to the Netherlands to study, and I've been living here ever since. And I always had like a way of thinking that was like more focused to the internet. So I
mm,
started using the internet a lot when I was 15, and it kind of like never stopped. So much of my
right,
life is online, and I
right.
never really was used to being a part of like a local community. And when I studied here in the Netherlands, I did start to build up a little network of
Mhm.
artists that I know here. And I also, started to get to know the artist community here more and more. So it's something that was not like I was focused on doing everything online. And I also managed a lot of communities online from a young age. So we had like drawing
That's
boards where
cool.
people could draw and post their work, and we comment on each
Wow.
other's work. I have had a Facebook group for a really long time. I'm about to launch a Discord community for my patrons as well.
Wow.
So a lot of that has been like international, like across
Right.
borders. But I've noticed that it's so valuable to like know your local artists, because there are very specific challenges that artists have only in, your own country, like the kind of specific issues that you have around building a business, for example, are
Mhm.
like unique to what I have in the Netherlands. So I've started doing more and more like sort of sketch sessions together with other artists here.
Wow.
There's like an event that happens twice a year called Playgrounds that I always go to, and I meet a lot of local artists. And um, so there's more and more stuff that I'm doing, but I think it's it sounds a lot less tight knit, what I have than what you guys have, and
Mhm.
that's something that I think needs to be like consciously built up. Um, and you need to consciously participate in it, and I'm trying to like make more and more time for it, because it really does help to like see artists face to face as well and talk about
Yeah.
specific challenges. So
Yeah.
especially during COVID, I really noticed like during those pandemic years, or we're still in it, but like the
Yeah.
lockdowns and stuff from
Yeah.
the last 2 years, I really noticed that like I was seeing doing these community activities less with other artists, and I was seeing mostly my family and like some close friends. And
Yeah.
I really missed talking about art, like about making art and how it feels, and like the psychology of it. Like I didn't really have that as much because I wasn't seeing artists face to face and
Mhm.
really taking the time to talk about this stuff.
Mhm.
And when I started going to events again, when that started happening, it was like so refreshing to connect with other people who had also been creating and
Yeah.
trying to balance work with like inspiration.
Yeah.
And so I'm really trying to make that more of a priority now.
Oh, okay. Honestly, I think it's interesting because even if you don't have a local community, I mean, you were able to bring these people from different countries together, and I think that's actually amazing. Like you've been doing this like way before, so it's interesting to have all of these, like without the, I guess, limitation of having to fly. Like you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
be in a community at home. So I think that's also actually really cool and really amazing that you were able to do all of these things. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really valuable for a lot of people who can't, because I know that there are like I know that the Philippines has like a very vibrant art community, because I sometimes see like the hashtags coming by on Twitter where people are
oh,
posting, and
RPH
yes, and
hashtag,
there's like
yeah,
so much beautiful art there, and I've really
yeah,
noticed that like there's a lot of talent. Um, and I know that there are a lot of places where there are like these art communities, but they're just like not on the map. Like people are not
yeah,
aware of them.
yeah,
And it's really important for them to like they can use the internet to be like an active part of this community. Whereas before you would have to like physically move,
yeah,
you'd have
yeah,
to go to places where like these events take place or where these industries are thriving, but then they get excluded a lot. So I
yeah,
think it's really good that the internet can bring like more awareness of like these international art communities so that they're less isolated.
yeah, exactly. Actually, I don't know if it's a benefit, but like when the pandemic happened, like conferences became more accessible
Yeah,
because, right? Because you can
because they
just
went online.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can just go online. And before, especially for like global south countries with really um, difficult like visa restrictions, it's hard for us to fly to where the conferences are. So I think having having the access to internet, like yeah, I think it kind of made everything more open and
Yeah.
accessible to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and it's also been just so important for people to acknowledge how much talent there is in other parts of the world. Like the
yeah,
West tends to be very focused on itself, and like
right.
and that should be over now.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
there's too much
yeah.
talent in other places. Like we can't ignore that
Exactly.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like with the conferences, like if they want to bring it back, I feel like you should do it in the south, you know, like
Yeah.
bring the conferences near to people who cannot afford it or to go to it. Because
Yeah.
you also mentioned that it's also really different being in a physical space
Yeah.
interacting with all of these people. But yeah, the problem is how do we bring all of these people together? So yeah, I think with the West, yeah, let's go here.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. Yeah, I think here in the Netherlands, we have this event that's looking more and more for opportunities in other areas of the world and are like
Wow.
trying to set stuff up in for like South Asia, like that area. So I really hope that they, manage to do that because there's a vibrant industry there as well.
Exactly. Okay. The next topic is about clients and about projects. So, is there, in terms of like the people you work with or the projects you have, is there any kind of infrastructure that supports freelance creatives like yourself? Like, um, how different are your experiences being a full time digital artist in Europe?
For me, most of the work that I do is like international. So I do a
Mm,
lot of work for companies in places where it's all through the internet. So it's all like
right,
just online.
right.
And I so that's been like really helpful for me. I like to build my career as an artist to
Yeah,
basically be able to cross borders in that way. I don't
right.
think I would have been able to really be as active in the game industry, for example, that I do a lot of concept art for if I had to be there in person.
Right.
Um, but I do like nowadays, I do most of the client work that I do is like more local because it's more
Mm-hmm.
convenient. So it
Oh.
is helpful to have like a lot of the projects like in your local area,
Mm-hmm.
especially logistics wise.
Right.
Like just financially, like if it's within the EU, it's just all a lot easier. But I do think that like similar to the art community issue, I do think that it's very like it's nowadays a lot easier to do work internationally.
Mm.
I don't know how that is if you experience it that way too. Like, do you have more local work or do you also work for like international clients through the internet?
Yeah. Honestly, in the Philippines, I guess having a design and illustration career is actually hard. There's not a lot of money into it because local clients, not like I'm lucky because I was able to work with some local clients that are able to um, pay for my work for what I would usually price. But like in the general scheme of things, paying for design and art for local brands is still not really a common practice. So, like working locally, there's a lot of compromise. Of course, I understand some of the brands which are just starting. So I understand that. But yeah, it's actually still a struggle. So now, a, a lot of I guess 60% of my projects are international work because they can pay more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually I'm also like lucky to be able to get those international clients. And yeah, like right now a chunk of my work is from international clients, but um, like for this year I've had more local clients, but yeah, there's still that struggle um, working locally.
Yeah, I get that. Well, we have the same issue in the Netherlands. Like we have
Mm,
some companies that are big enough to like to pay well, like to pay
yeah,
comparable to like large American companies, for example, when it
right,
comes to games and concept art or
right,
animation. But most of what is happening here is like very like we don't have much of an animation industry here, for example. So for those
right,
of us who studied animation and are like going into the industry, it's like uh just so hard really to build a career, so you have to diversify your work. Like most
right,
people who studied animation end up going into other areas of work eventually because it's just hard to sustain a career fully on animation.
right.
um and the same like for the game industry, we have like some game companies, but we actually only have like one big game company, and that's Guerrilla Games,
Mm,
and everybody kind of wants to work there if you're determined to work in games. So it's like everybody's kind of vying for the same job, and not everybody can
right,
get it. So
right, right.
there's some struggle like within, I'm really glad that the community is fairly supportive of one another and very like helpful towards one another, because it could very easily become hostile because of like the
Yeah,
limited options. And
yeah.
most people just accept the fact that they have to look elsewhere for their opportunities, so
Hmm.
you have to be creative and try other stuff. A lot of artists end up doing a lot of comic cons, which are becoming more and more popular, and just selling
Right,
your own
right,
work, like
right.
trying to build your business selling prints or merchandise with your art on
Yeah,
it. A lot of people like have a web shop or are looking
right,
elsewhere for clients outside. The Netherlands is just too small, and we have a very like
right.
limited creative industry.
Mm,
So we gotta like look beyond our borders. But I guess it's always kind of been that way in this
yeah.
country because it is such a small country.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I can imagine that it's hard when the opportunities are limited and the income is limited. Then you
Yeah,
got a lot of like talent kind of competing for things, and it can get
yeah,
really challenging.
yeah,
But I think artists tend to be very supportive and helpful towards one another. So that's always like that offsets the difficult
yeah,
situation. Yeah.
yeah. Like when you mentioned the merch, actually that's what a lot of the independent artists do, and illustrators, designers, like they print merch, they print clothing, they have their own web shops, like just
Yeah.
these other avenues of like generating income and supporting yourself. There are also workshops like what you are doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, and it's kind of funny because like it's everyone supports everyone, but we're also just the same people buying each other's
Yeah.
art.
Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
something my boyfriend has said to me before, where he's like, all the money in the artist community is just artists supporting the other artists. Because most of the people that are like buying the merch and the prints are also themselves
Yeah.
artists, right?
Yeah.
But it's wholesome. But it also
Yeah, yeah.
it should be like different. I think there should be more
Yeah.
appreciation of artists
Yeah.
outside of the art
Outside. Yeah,
community. But I
exactly.
am very
Yeah.
happy that artists themselves like are so supportive to one another.
Yeah.
It's a wholesome
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, but like it's amazing instead of like being cutthroat and everything.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so we've discussed the communities that we belong to, and part of every creative economy is are people who are just starting out in their careers. So, um, do you have any tips for people who are just starting out in their careers?
Yeah, I have so many tips. It like for me, so when I was like a very hardworking student, so I was really like maybe a bit too much. Like I
Wow.
was a little overly focused on good grades and things like that. So and when you're in school, like when you're in art school, you are focused on doing the best you can, like just putting all the time and energy you can into something to get the best end product. And when you start out in the field, like you really need to let that go. Like you can't put all your time and effort into making the best possible project. You have to learn that time is money. So it needs to be in proportion to your pay. So you can't like, suffer or struggle through something and you're not being paid enough to do that. And it also needs to fit in your schedule. So
Right.
a struggle that I ran into fairly quickly. Well, actually, initially I didn't have this issue as much, but as soon as I started getting big name clients, I was so concerned about whether what I did was good enough for them that I like burned myself out by working way too much, too many hours, too little breaks, like everything the client asked, like, could you do this? Could you do that? I would be like, yes. And I would do that, even though it was going over my limits. And then I kind of like found myself like really struggling to be able to even spend a couple hours a day drawing. I was really burned out from that. So I really think it's important for people starting out to like be very mindful of your boundaries, which is something that you don't really learn as an art student or as a hobbyist. Like as an art student or hobbyist, you don't realize like that those boundaries are so important because you're doing it out of like passion and love for what you do, but you have to kind of like save that for your own project and your own work and have a more professional attitude towards paid work. I think that was the main mental switch that I had to make when I started out. Did you ever run into issues like that?
Yeah, actually, that's really interesting. You saying that, like we have to take a step back because when we're fresh graduates, like I don't know, but some of the teachers were like kind of glorifying busy or stress. Like when you start in your first job, it's you're not gonna like eat or you'll be just in the office until midnight and everything. And I think this is a really refreshing take because I feel like that is very outdated, like burning yourself out. And, like you're still young. And I feel like that environment, like that kind of environment that would nurture you would pass that down to younger artists. So like, I think it's nice to hear that advice that you do need to burn yourself out and having time for, actually it's important to have time for your personal work because that's something that you would love to do. And
it is, it's really important because I think nowadays people are more vulnerable to burnout than ever before because like artists are not only doing their paid work, but they're also like doing a lot of side hustles, and they're also like on social media a lot, which is like constant, right? It never ends. It's always going on. And there are a lot of like things that artists do these days that are like nice, that the opportunities are there, but they're also like they maximize the potential to be over engaged with art, and you have to disconnect sometimes. And you have to prioritize like enjoying drawing because otherwise you can't keep it up for very long. And so that's why I think boundaries are so important. I think it's really good to like, for me, I didn't learn a lot of like mental health, self-care kind of stuff in school. I feel like it's almost like the opposite of what they teach you at art school. And that's why you have to really prioritize it as soon as you're starting out for yourself, to like really think about what do I need in order to stay balanced, in order to stay like, and also know that like, because artists are always like, I want to be the best and I want to do the most and I want to get the maximum. And you have to realize like there are limits, like maybe good enough is okay. Like maybe your best is okay, but like that doesn't mean that you have to like push yourself past your limits. It's actually the artists that are, I think, very successful are the ones that just find what works for them and they just do that. So they're not like the best at everything. They're just doing their best within their own limits. So like you got to find your own limits first, and then you have like more long term, like you can keep it up for a longer amount of time.
That's cool. That's really, really sage advice for people who are starting out. So speaking of burnout, are you still experiencing that right now? And what do you do about it? Like,
I don't really have those issues anymore. So I've really changed my schedule, my way of handling like my creative practice fundamentally.
Mhm.
Like it took a lot of time. It took many years for me to like gradually make changes to how I do things. Like first I had to make a mental switch. Like I had to
Mhm.
tell myself like I'm not going to burn myself out because for me the burnout would be more likely to happen if I was doing client work, because in my mind I'm like,
Mm.
oh, this client is expecting something of me. I have to do my best. I have to prove myself. So I
Right.
had to like switch that off. I had to literally just tell myself like, clients don't care if you burn out. They'll find another artist. You know, they're
Yeah.
a corporation. Like they're
Yeah.
not like concerned with your well-being. They're just trying to get what they paid for. So I had to tell myself that. But like some artists could burn out more likely from doing personal work. And then you also have to like say like, this doesn't matter as much as I think that it does. You know, you have to find
Mhm.
out what kind of triggers those feelings. And then I also had to change like my way of working, like less hours, more breaks, different
Mm.
schedule. For me, like doing exercise in the morning became very helpful, because I start the day with focusing on myself and what I
Right.
need and my own health, and then I do the other stuff. And also changing how I handle tasks that are extremely stressful, like keeping up with my inbox. Like I just
Right.
started, you know, like little things like that. So I
Yeah.
found like
Yeah.
all these little things that were building the stress and tried to tackle
Yeah.
them one by one. And now I have a workflow um, that is quite manageable for me. But the main thing that helped me was to just say no to a lot of stuff like that. And that's
Right.
hard because it means that
That's
you can't
hard.
do everything. Like when I
Yeah.
was younger, I wanted to do everything. I wanted to keep up with everything. And now
Yeah.
I just say like, no, I just don't have time. Like I look at my schedule
Yeah.
and I'm like, I have to say no to
No.
this.
Yeah.
And it's too bad because a lot of that stuff is like really exciting, but I just don't have the time. Like it's just
Yeah.
simple. And
Yeah.
because of that, I'm now like able to take on what I can take on, and I'm more like realistic about what I just simply can't. Um,
Yeah.
and I think creative, like a lot of artists struggle with art block, and that's like that your creativity is kind of up. You don't have like ideas. And I do think like for me, what really helps is to just slow down and scale back to more simple artistic routine. So I
Yeah.
just like kind of try to shift my focus to making like simple studies from reference, so I don't have to come up with ideas, or I
Right.
focus
Right.
on just sketching in my sketchbook with some music on, you know, like the
Right.
simple stuff, so that I'm
Yeah.
still creating, but I am, you know, doing it in a more simple way. And for other artists, like I think taking a break can be
Yeah.
extremely helpful, like
Yeah.
stuff like that. So
Yeah.
just all the ways of setting limits, saying no,
Yeah.
making it
Yeah.
easier. I tend to push myself too far.
Yeah.
What about
Um,
you? Are you somebody that needs to like, are you somebody that pushes yourself really far, or are you somebody that needs like more motivation to work?
yeah, actually, I've been like, I'm used to working under pressure, a lot of
Yeah.
cramming. I don't know, maybe it's
Yeah.
already
Same. Yeah.
instilled in us as
Yeah.
artists.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I really do, I just take a break. Like prioritizing myself. Like honestly, sometimes I just go window shopping online.
Yeah.
As simple
Yeah.
as that. Yeah, like
Yeah. Whatever it takes.
or watch Netflix, like literally do something that's not related to what I'm doing right now. Like I feel
Yeah.
like I just need a change of scenery. And I also like, having said that, I feel like artists don't need to make their job their whole lives. Like
Yeah.
you can have, like, it's really important to have interests outside of what we do. Like it doesn't have to be all art, all gaming, all concept art. Like I feel like we need to have other interests. To I feel like that would also contribute to the burnout if you're
Yeah.
like living and breathing your job. So yeah, I think just taking a step back and, like what you said, just doing, like, prioritizing yourself. And yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's a problem.
It is
Almost
because
all of us face. Yeah.
yeah, it is because also like I think a lot of us started creating art as our hobby, like as
Yeah.
something to do in our free time, and
Yeah.
then it becomes your
Yeah.
job, and then it's like, what do I do as my hobby? Like I'm
Yeah.
always looking for something to do in my free time.
Right.
I'm always thinking like, okay, maybe I should try this hobby or that sport or this thing. And
Yeah.
it doesn't have the same impact on me as creating art. Like that's my
Yeah.
favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
So it's a constant search, but I think it's important to prioritize it indeed, getting away from it. For me, like watching very bad television, like just reality TV. It's like it has nothing to do with
Yeah.
art. I'm also not
Yeah.
curating my life in any way. I'm just
Right.
doing
Right.
something that's like absolutely basic.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
also, it's a disconnection, you know, it
It's
helps you get away
fun.
from it. Yeah,
Yeah. Just
exactly.
switch your brain off and just
Yeah.
watch whatever like trashy
Yeah.
show.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That always helps me because I always feel like artists maybe need permission to sometimes indulge in things that are like absolutely not tasteful or helpful or inspiring. They're just
Yeah.
truly
Yeah.
like a way to spend your time away from art. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. So, last question. Where, like, having said that about like trying to be your best constantly, and I guess this question is about your self-criticism. Like, there's, of course, that helps us, right, to improve, but sometimes the critique turns into self-sabotage. So like, where do you draw the line? And yeah, like, I guess, what's your advice to artists that are very, I guess, hard on themselves?
Yeah, that's really common. I think it's what you said, like artists need to be like critical in order to grow, right? It's like
Yeah.
part of like who we are as artists is to see other art that's like better than ours and to be like, I want to be able to do that, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
so we need it to some extent to keep growing,
Yeah.
but sometimes it's not helpful at all. And I always try to, I think you know when it's not helping you when you kind of start to get stuck, like when you find that it's holding you back in your creative process. And I think a
Right.
lot of people feel that when they sort of sit down to draw, but then they have so much dread, so much negative
Right.
emotions around it
Right.
that they feel like afraid to continue. And that's a sign that like you maybe are too heavy on the negative self-talk and that you need to scale it back. So I always think that it's helpful to look at it in practical terms. I feel like it's very common for people to feel something like negativity towards their art and to assume that it's true because you're feeling that. Like you look at your art and you're like, it's not good enough. And then
Yeah.
because you feel that way, you take it as fact. But in actuality, that's not a fact. It's just a thought. And it's often
Yeah.
a fear. And fears can like you can't get rid of those thoughts, but you can also explore other thoughts as well. Like you can tell yourself like, well, maybe it is good enough. Maybe I just don't feel that great about my work right now. And
Yeah.
to kind of create some distance from that and to
Yeah.
listen to the signs, like when you start to feel very bad about your work, or you start to like self-sabotage, to be like, instead of thinking like it's gone wrong, to think like, okay, this is a sign, this is a signal that I need to change my approach, and just look at how you can do things differently. So for one thing that often helps people, I think, is to stop comparing your art to other artists. So a lot of people are like spending hours on Pinterest just collecting inspiration.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can inspire you, but sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes that
Yeah.
like kills your inspiration because you're comparing yourself too much to
Yeah.
stuff that like is starting to make you feel bad about yourself. So it's okay to like not seek out inspiration.
Yeah.
Something that I always think is a good like opposite exercise to do from that is to redraw some of your older art. So like go back to when you were
Oh.
starting out and like draw it again with your current skills, and then you can see how far you've come. You can
Wow.
see how those challenges back then, how you overcame them with time and how much better you're at it now. And in that way you stop comparing yourself to other artists, but you start comparing yourself to like yourself earlier on. And that tends to be a confidence booster. And also things like, just distracting yourself. So like listening to a podcast or listening to music, putting on some television in the background, like something to keep your mind occupied, because sometimes when you have like too much time to think while you're drawing, then those thoughts can easily become extremely negative, right? So
Exactly.
try to find ways to kind of like silence those thoughts. And I think the most important thing is to just realize that when you are negative about yourself, that doesn't mean that your art is bad. It just means like you're in a certain mental state, and there's a
Yeah.
lot you can do to move away from that. You don't have
Yeah.
to take that as fact. It's not
Yeah.
the truth. It's just a feeling.
Yeah.
And you can have all kinds of feelings, and that is just because that feeling is so intense and immediate doesn't mean that you have to act on that.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh. Thank you. That was like, wow. That's
I
like
think about this a
really,
lot.
yeah, like it's really, really good advice. Cause like, yeah, like with the, like when you mentioned the Pinterest and like that, the inspiration turning on you, like, yeah, that could actually happen. And um, what I really appreciated is like just compare yourself to yourself from years ago.
Yeah.
So that was like a really good advice. And sometimes I would actually look at my old work and see how far I've come.
Yeah.
Like every time I try to doubt myself, like, oh my gosh, you've come so far, you've done these things, and that puts those negative thoughts away. So yeah, thank you, Lois,
Yeah.
for that advice.
Yeah, no, I always think about this stuff a lot. Like I get that question a lot. And I also like, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like a lot of my career, like when I look at like how my own art evolved, I feel like I'm able to like, I have been able to do many of the things that I did because I just like somehow managed to let go of expectations that I put on myself with my art. Because I always did it in my free time for fun. And when I went to art
Right.
school, my teachers criticized my personal work a lot because they thought it was just like, I don't know, they didn't like it. And so I
Right.
made it just for me. I just kept it away from my teachers. And
Right.
I always created that art just for my own, like I never thought like, oh, I have to be good at it or whatever. I just thought like I'm doing this for me. It's nobody else gets to say like whether it's good or bad, or like they can say that, but I don't, it's not something that I'm open to. Like I don't care what people think. I'm just doing it for my own enjoyment. And now I do care a lot more because it's become my work, but I
Yeah.
started doing it just for myself and basically saying like, well, if you want to be, you know, super critical of what I do, just focus on my real work, which was like my
Yeah.
animation or my school work, you know. And that kind of always kept me from being too critical. And now I feel like I benefited a lot from that. And I always want other, like, I feel like there's too much debate within the art community about pushing yourself further and doing
Yeah.
more and being
Yeah.
more intense and getting
Yeah.
more inspiration. And I always want to be kind of like a voice in the art community that's saying the opposite. Like,
Yeah.
you can do a little less and you can take a
Yeah.
break, and
Yeah.
what you did is good enough. You
Yes.
can just put it aside and move on. And I feel like hopefully that can bring a little bit more balance to that debate. And like let people know that it's okay, and that
Yeah.
they're, you know, if you're doing your best, it's enough. It's okay.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Lois, for saying that. That's really, really good. And yeah, so I guess final remarks. Like, do you have any message for your Filipino fans here?
I am really grateful to have done this interview and to be able to speak directly to the Filipino fans. And I am like aware of how much talent and creativity there is in this community. So I think we're going to see a lot more from this art community in the future because it's going so well. And I would just say like keep up the great work, and thank you so much for having me and having interest in my art. I'm super grateful to all my fans from all over the world, including the Philippines.
Thank you, Lois, and I hope you can visit us sometime
Oh, me
after
too.
this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Lois, and everyone else. Thank you for joining us today. And I hope you all enjoyed listening to our discussion about the creative community, about digital art, and everything in between. And please don't forget to grab a copy of The Style of Lois from fullybookedonline.com. So, yeah, stay safe, everyone, and keep on reading. Bye.